dust, decay, and a secret locked away for decades, until a single crimson-sealed letter arrived, exposing a life built on a devastating lie. What happens when the only people you trust are the ones who stole your past, and the proof of your true identity is guarded by the woman who abandoned you? The attic air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust, decaying paper, and a silence that only true abandonment can cultivate. Sunlight fractured by grimy dormer windows striped the floorboards where I stood, a reluctant archaeologist of my own past. My grandmother, bless her secretive soul, had finally passed, leaving behind a life meticulously organized, except for this one forbidden space. They said I was the only one who could handle the estate, the only one who wouldn't just throw things away. Funny, now that I was surrounded by the debris of 80 years, I felt utterly unqualified. I was hunting for the deed to the property, a simple, tedious task meant to get me out of the suffocating grief. Instead, my fingers brushed against something yielding, tucked beneath a stack of moth-eaten velvet curtains, a small, locked wooden box inlaid with tarnished brass. It wasn't the ornate jewelry box my grandmother usually kept on her dresser. This was darker, rougher, the kind of chest you'd keep secrets in, not trinkets. It felt strangely warm to the touch, despite the chill of the attic. I tried prying the lid, uselessly. There was no keyhole visible, just a complex, almost invisible seam. Frustration coiled in my gut. I was about to smash it open with a forgotten fireplace poker when I noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible catch near the hinge. I pressed it tentatively, and with a soft, aged click that echoed like a gunshot in the silence, the lid sprang open an inch. Inside, nestled on faded blue silk, was a single yellowed envelope. It was sealed with deep crimson wax, bearing an impression I didn't recognize. Not a family crest, but a stylized, angular bird in flight. The paper felt brittle, almost fragile enough to disintegrate if breathed upon too heavily. My name, Elias, was written across the front in elegant, looping script. The ink a deep, unfaded black. My name. Addressed to me, but not signed by anyone I knew. And then I saw the dates scrawled beneath my name, October 12th, 1985. I froze. I was born in late 1986. This letter predated my existence by over a year. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. Who wrote this? Why was it hidden here? And how could it be addressed to someone who hadn't yet drawn breath? With trembling hands, I used the edge of the nearby poker to carefully score the wax seal, breaking the bird's image in half. The scent that wafted out wasn't musty. It was sharp, like ozone just before a storm. I slid the single heavy sheet of paper free, unfolded it slowly, and leaned into the weak light filtering from the window. The first line seemed to leap off the page, written in that same uncompromising hand. My dearest Elias, by the time you read this, the deception will have run its course, and you must understand the truth about the accident, the adoption, and the life you think is yours. The word deception slammed into me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stumbled back a step, the letter crinkling in my grip, the attic suddenly feeling far too small, the shadows deepening around my feet. Accident? Adoption? My life, the one I knew, the one built on the bedrock of my parents' gentle, unwavering love, the memories of scraped knees and Christmases past, felt like it was dissolving beneath my very soles. I forced myself to reread the sentence, needing the context to make sense of the impossible claim. My parents, Robert and Clara, they were meticulous, honest, almost aggressively normal. They had told me the story of my birth countless times, a complicated delivery, a long recovery, a miracle baby they prayed for. An adoption story? Never. My eyes darted back to the page, scanning hungrily past the elegant cursive. The author continued, their tone shifting from formal instruction to raw desperation. They gave you a name that was not yours, a history that was fabricated stone by stone. Robert and Clara are not your progenitors, they are your guardians. Excellent guardians, perhaps, but mandated caretakers nonetheless. You were placed with them for your protection, Elias, but the necessity for that protection has now passed, and the tether holding the lie is fraying. Protection from what? The author hadn't signed their name, but the language suggested an intimate, agonizing involvement. I moved to the next paragraph, my pulse now a violent throb in my neck, drowning out the faint sounds of the neighborhood below. The key to everything lies not in your documented past, but in the one you were deliberately shielded from. Remember the recurring nightmare? The sound of shattering glass, the smell of burning oil? That wasn't imagination. That was a memory your fragile mind could not process. The fire, Elias. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a coordinated event. A fire. I did have that nightmare. For years, I dismissed it as trauma related to hearing about some distant childhood accident, but my parents always brushed it off with vague reassurances. Now, the vague was becoming horribly specific. I sank onto an old steamer trunk, the dust motes dancing wildly in the light beam beside me. I needed to know who wrote this, who held this secret. I flipped the letter over. On the back, in the same handwriting, was a brief, chilling instruction. Go to the old place. The address is written on the underside of the box. Look beneath the loose floorboard in the master bedroom closet, the one where Clara always keeps her winter boots. There is an object there that proves my words. Do not tell them you know. They monitor more than you think. And Elias, if you hesitate, if you speak to anyone about this, you seal your fate. My blood ran cold. They monitor more than you think. Who were they? Robert and Clara? The thought was like swallowing shards of ice. They had tucked me in last night, kissed my forehead, worried about my upcoming quarterly review at work. They loved me. They had to love me. I looked back at the wooden box resting on the dusty floor, the underside. Heart racing, I flipped the heavy chest over. Etched crudely into the dark wood, almost hidden in the grain, was a sequence of numbers. 417 Willow Creek Lane. That address meant nothing to me. It wasn't our suburban street. It was miles away, an older, more run-down section of the city. But the second instruction was the most terrifying. The loose floorboard in my house in the master bedroom closet, the one my parents shared. If this letter was true, if my life was a carefully constructed stage set, then my parents were not just hiding secrets. They were actively participating in a deep, systemic cover-up. I knew exactly which board it was. Sometimes when Clara was shifting things around, that floor would squeak in a distinct, hollow way. I couldn't stay here. The urge to confront them was overpowering, but the warning, do not tell them you know, held a terrifying weight. If they were capable of lying about my entire existence, what else were they capable of? I shoved the letter and the cryptic box into my messenger bag. I had to go to Willow Creek Lane. I had to find proof before I faced them. Slipping down the attic stairs, I managed to pull the hatch shut just as I heard the faint sound of the washing machine finishing its cycle downstairs. Robert must be awake. I navigated the hall toward the kitchen, projecting an air of casual morning routine, my bag feeling impossibly heavy with the weight of a stolen identity. Robert was making coffee, his back to me, humming a tune I'd always associated with Sundays. "Morning, champ," he said, pouring 2 mugs. "Big day today, right? You look pale. Sleeping okay?" "Fine, Dad," I managed, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Just a bit of stress. I think I'm going to take the morning off, clear my head." He turned, his smile warm, familiar, yet now utterly alien. "That's a great idea, son. You deserve a break." He held out the coffee. My hand shook violently as I reached for the mug. The porcelain felt scalding hot. He steadied my wrist with a firm, comforting grip, his thumb resting just beneath my pulse point. In that brief moment of contact, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a fleeting, sharp calculation, gone before I could truly register it. It wasn't paternal concern, it was assessment. "Everything all right, Elias?" he asked, his voice softening, too softly. I pulled my hand back, nearly dropping the coffee. "Yeah, perfect." I retreated toward the front door, needing air, needing distance. "I'm just stepping out for a quick walk." I closed the door behind me, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet street. I didn't walk. I ran. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, jamming them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I risked a glance back at the house. Robert was standing in the living room window, not waving, not watching me leave for a walk, but standing perfectly still, his silhouette rigid against the light. And then I saw Clara join him. They were both staring directly at my retreating car. It wasn't a look of worry. It was the look of 2 wardens realizing the experimental subject has just breached the perimeter fence. I slammed the gas pedal down, speeding toward Willow Creek Lane, but as I hit the main road, my phone buzzed insistently. A text message from Clara. The message contained only a single, high-resolution photograph. The inside of my messenger bag, clearly showing the brittle, yellowed letter and the dark wooden box. The caption underneath read simply, "We know you took it. Turn around now or face the consequences of the life you were meant to forget." The world seemed to tilt sideways. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the passenger seat, the screen still blazing with the impossible image. It wasn't just that they knew, it was how they knew. I hadn't been gone 5 minutes. The implication was terrifying. They hadn't just been watching the house, they were watching me, possibly even my car. The "they" mentioned in the letter suddenly had faces, and they were the faces I called Mom and Dad. My survival instinct, honed by the sudden, brutal realization that my entire reality was a carefully maintained illusion, screamed at me to pull over, to go home, to beg for forgiveness. But the image of the shattered wax seal, the promise of the object hidden in my closet, anchored me to the flight. If I went back, I was submitting to recapture, to whatever terrifying narrative they had planned. If I kept going, I was defying people who clearly possessed surveillance capabilities far beyond standard suburban paranoia. I snatched the phone back up, my fingers already dialing the only number I could think of, the one I'd been explicitly warned against. I had to risk it. I needed outside help, someone untainted by this web. I punched in my oldest friend, Mark. It rang twice, 3 times, an eternity. Before he picked up, his voice groggy. "Elias? Dude, it's 7 in the morning. What's up?" "Mark, listen to me, and don't interrupt. I need you to do something impossible. I need you to go to my house, Robert and Clara's house, and I need you to go into the master bedroom closet." My breath hitched. "There's a loose floorboard under the winter boots. I need you to find whatever is under it and meet me. Now, don't ask questions." "Whoa, Elias, you sound completely unhinged. What is going on? Are you high?" "I am being followed, Mark. And if you don't trust me, if you hang up, you might as well be helping them. This is about my life." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. "Look, I'm sending you the address. I'm heading to another location mentioned in a letter. If I don't check in by noon, call the police. Tell them my parents kidnapped me. But get that item first." I fired off the location, the text message, and then, without waiting for a response that might never come, I hung up and tossed the phone onto the back seat, resolving to drive until the battery died or the gas tank emptied. I turned off the main highway and navigated the increasingly narrow, weed-choked roads leading toward Willow Creek Lane. The neighborhood was exactly as the letter implied: derelict. Houses sagged, paint peeled like sunburnt skin, and an unsettling quiet hung in the humid air. Number 417 was the worst, a small clapboard structure that looked ready to collapse into the overgrown yard. The windows were boarded up, the front porch listing dangerously to one side. This was not the home of a meticulous caretaker. This was a ruin. I parked half a block away, cutting the engine but leaving the key in the ignition. Adrenaline had burned away my fear, replacing it with a cold, focused determination. I retrieved the letter and the box, pulling on the cheap, thin leather gloves I kept for emergencies. I approached the house slowly, checking the rearview mirror constantly. Still nothing. No black sedan, no shadow in my periphery. The front door was warped but unlocked, swinging inward with a low, mournful groan that scraped along my nerves. The interior was pitch black, smelling intensely of mildew and stagnant water. I used my phone flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the suffocating darkness. Dust lay inches thick on everything. Old furniture draped in white sheets, overturned lamps, a chilling scene of sudden abandonment. I found the front living room. It was empty, save for a single high-backed armchair facing the boarded-up window. And sitting in that chair was a figure. It wasn't a ghost, but something far worse. Slumped forward, head resting against the velvet armrest, was a man. He was wearing old, expensive-looking clothes, now moth-eaten and stained. His skin was parchment-tight, his hair long and white, matted to his skull. He looked ancient, preserved by the dry rot of the room. I froze halfway across the room, my breath catching. Was this the author? Dead? A casualty of the very deception I was investigating? "Hello?" I whispered, the sound swallowed instantly by the silence, as if my voice had triggered a final, internal mechanism. The figure slowly, agonizingly began to move. His head lifted, not sharply, but with the grinding effort of rusted machinery. Two eyes, cloudy and pale like polished sea glass, fixed on me. A dry, rattling sound escaped his throat, a breath attempting to form speech after decades of disuse. "Elias!" The voice rasped, impossibly thin yet piercingly clear. "You shouldn't have come here. They always watch the address." My mind reeled. "Who are you? Do you know about Robert and Clara, my parents?" The old man managed a skeletal smile, a grotesque contortion of his features. "Parents? No, boy, they are the jailers. And I am the only one who remembers your real father." He raised one withered hand, pointing a trembling finger toward the far wall, a wall that looked solid and impenetrable. But the proof. The proof isn't here. It's what you left behind." He tried to say more, his face twisting in apparent pain, but before another syllable could escape, the sound of gravel crunching violently outside shattered the stillness. Heavy tires squealed to a halt directly in front of the house. Headlights, blinding and merciless, cut through the cracks in the boarded windows, instantly illuminating the dust-filled room and the terrified expression locked on my face. A door slammed shut outside, not one door, but two. Strong, heavy footsteps pounded up the rotting porch steps, moving with practiced, intimidating speed toward the front door. The old man slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide with terminal dread, whispering one final, frantic word as the porch boards began to groan under heavy impact. "Run!" The old man's dying warning was drowned out by the sound of the front door being splintered inward. The impact was brutal, sending shards of rotten wood flying across the room, accompanied by a deep, authoritative shout. "Elias Vance, do not move. This is your final opportunity to comply." It wasn't Robert's voice. It was deeper, colder, layered with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. This was the they the letter warned about. Professional, immediate, and very close. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The old man in the chair seemed to deflate, his eyes closing as if he'd expended the last erg of his life force on that final warning. I spun around, desperately searching for an escape route other than the gaping hole in the front door. Behind me, the back wall looked like bare, dusty plaster. "There is nowhere to go, Vance," the voice boomed again, closer now. Two figures in dark tactical gear were silhouetted against the sudden intrusion of daylight from the hallway entrance. They weren't police. They moved with predatory precision. They held no visible weapons, but their posture implied lethal capability. My mind flashed back to the photograph on my phone, Clara displaying my stolen bag. They hadn't just been watching, they had been tracking me since I left. They knew exactly what I possessed. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I swung it wildly around the room. I noticed something I'd missed in the initial shock. A narrow, almost invisible gap between the back wall and a heavy, dust-shrouded wardrobe. It looked just large enough to squeeze through. "He's moving toward the rear of the structure," one of the figures barked into a headset. I hurled the antique armchair across the room, a futile distraction, sending it crashing against the wall. The momentary chaos bought me a second. I dove toward the wardrobe, shoving with every ounce of strength I possessed. The heavy piece of furniture scraped grudgingly across the floor, revealing a dark, narrow passage, a crawl space, perhaps leading out the back. I scrambled into the opening, pulling the wardrobe back just enough to obscure the gap, ignoring the sharp splinters tearing at my arms and legs. I was halfway through, belly crawling on the damp earth beneath the house, when the first tactical agent reached the vacated space. "He's in the crawl space. Secure the perimeter. Do not let him reach the tree line." The second agent didn't bother with finesse. A heavy boot slammed against the wardrobe, sending it flying sideways, exposing the cramped entrance to the tunnel. I heard the metallic snick of a weapon being armed. "Vance, stop moving, or we will use force." I pushed harder, my face scraping against rocks and roots. I could taste the dirt, the metallic tang of fear overwhelming everything else. I didn't know what lay at the end of this narrow passage, but it had to be better than what waited behind me. Then, a piercing electronic shriek erupted from the house, a sound so high-pitched it felt like needles driving into my eardrums. It wasn't coming from the agents. It was coming from the old man's chair. The agents recoiled instantly, clutching their heads, their tactical composure momentarily shattered. "EMP! Damn it, he triggered a localized pulse!" one yelled, stumbling backward, his radio going dead. The shriek stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was pregnant with confusion, but it was my second chance. I burst out of the narrow space at the back of the house, finding myself not in a backyard, but in a dense thicket of overgrown pines. The air here was cooler, cleaner. I didn't stop to check my surroundings. I plunged into the woods, running blindly. I knew the agents would regain their bearings in seconds. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, the branches whipping my face, the rough terrain threatening to send me sprawling with every step. Finally, I collapsed behind the massive trunk of an oak tree, gasping for air, listening to the receding sounds of chaos from the derelict house. They hadn't followed me into the woods, perhaps hesitant to lose sight of the structure, or perhaps disabled by the EMP burst. I was alone, exhausted, terrified. But I still had the letter and the box. I fumbled for the box in my bag, needing the concrete reality of the evidence. I pulled it out, my eyes scanning the dark wood one last time for any hidden mechanism. The one I had pressed earlier was still slightly depressed. I ran my thumb over the address etched on the underside, 417 Willow Creek Lane. As my thumb moved across the rough inscription, I felt a tiny give, a slight shift in the wood beneath the numbers. Curiosity overriding caution once more, I pressed harder on the etched address. A tiny panel, no bigger than a postage stamp, sprung open along the edge of the wood. Inside the minuscule compartment, tucked tightly against the silk lining, was not another document but a single tarnished key. It was old-fashioned, ornate, clearly meant for a heavy interior lock. And underneath the key, written in that same elegant, urgent script, was a single chilling sentence that made my blood run cold with a fresh wave of horror. This key unlocks the door to your true birth certificate. But be warned, Elias, the man you call Robert is not the only one who knows your real name. The woman who truly abandoned you waits on the other side of that lock. The final sentence echoed in the sudden, unnatural quiet of the forest. The woman who truly abandoned you waits on the other side of that lock. It wasn't just Robert and Clara who were part of the lie. The entire framework of my life was built on the active, intentional absence of someone else. My real mother. The key, the birth certificate, the life I was shielded from. It was all consolidated into this single, heavy piece of brass that now felt like a terrible final burden in my palm. I had to get back to the house. The agents were undoubtedly regrouping, and if they were trained, they would be sweeping the surrounding area soon. The only leverage I had was the knowledge contained within the box, and if the old man triggered an EMP, it suggested he was trying to buy me time, not just warn me away. He wanted me to get to the item under the floorboard. Heart pounding a desperate tattoo against my ribs, I retraced my path, using the denser foliage for cover. When I crept back to the edge of the property, the scene had changed again. The tactical agents were gone. The front door was still violently shattered, but the silence that replaced the previous chaos was far more unnerving. It felt like the quiet after a predator has made its kill. I slipped around the back, finding the narrow opening where I had escaped. The crawl space was tight, claustrophobic, but I navigated it faster this time, driven by a sense of desperate urgency. I burst back into the main room, scanning for the old man. He was exactly as I left him, slumped in the armchair, eyes closed. but beneath his motionless hand the carpet was saturated with a deep, dark stain. He hadn't just whispered his last word, he had paid for it. I didn't mourn him. I didn't have time. I bolted toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom, adrenaline masking the pain in my scraped limbs. If Robert and Clara were watching the house, they must have expected me to flee, not return for the second clue. The master bedroom was untouched, a pristine snapshot of comfortable domesticity, the very picture of the lie. The closet door was slightly ajar. I pulled it open, the scent of lavender and mothballs assaulting my senses. There, nestled beside Clara's expensive leather boots, was the faint outline of a slightly raised floorboard. I knelt, using the tip of the brass key from the box to gently pry up the edge. The board lifted easily. Beneath it, resting on the dusty subfloor, was a thick, bound document folder, secured with a heavy-duty lock. The lock was old, dark iron with an unmistakable, ornate keyhole. My hands were shaking too violently to insert the small key. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my mind into the cold, analytical space the letter had necessitated. I inserted the key. It slid in smoothly, perfectly aligned. I turned it with a decisive clack. The lock sprung open. I ripped the folder free, slamming the loose floorboard back into place just as I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway, fast. Too fast for Mark, too slow for the tactical unit. I didn't look at the birth certificate first. I snatched up the top document in the folder. It was a heavily stamped, official-looking document, clearly labeled Adoption Decree, Finalized, October 1985. My name wasn't Elias Vance. The name underneath the designation Adopted Child was Alexander Thorne. My birth parents were listed not as Robert and Clara, but as Dr. Alistair Thorne and Dr. Serafina Thorne. I recognized the name Serafina instantly. It was the name of the brilliant pioneering geneticist who had vanished from the scientific community decades ago after a catastrophic lab accident, the very accident I vaguely remembered smelling in my nightmares. I frantically flipped the page to the corresponding section for the adopting parents. Robert and Clara Vance were listed not as parents, but as designated custodial agents, Level 3 clearance. Their purpose? Long-term psychological shielding and archival maintenance. The door handle to the bedroom began to turn, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't the heavy, brutal entry of the tactical team. It was the slow, calculated turn of someone who knew they had already won. The door opened to reveal not Robert, but Clara. She stood framed in the doorway, no longer the gentle, worried woman from this morning. Her face was smooth, devoid of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and clear, the look of a woman who hadn't aged a day since 1985. She held nothing in her hands, yet her presence felt more threatening than any weapon. Alexander, she said, the name feeling right, alien and deeply earned. You broke the rules. We worked very hard to give you a quiet life. You lied, I managed, clutching the folder to my chest. You're not my mother. Clara stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. No, dear, I was never your mother. I was your warden, the first line of defense. Your real mother, Serafina. She left something in this house for you to find, something that jeopardizes everything we built to keep you safe from them. She took another slow step toward me. But you were never meant to know the whole story, Alexander. Serafina didn't just leave you, she left a contingency. That EMP was your signal, wasn't it? The old man didn't die to save you, he died to warn you about her. Clara sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. The true deception, Alexander. wasn't that you were adopted. It was that you were created. Serafina didn't want you hidden from the world. She wanted you hidden from the people who funded her research, the people who are standing outside right now waiting for me to bring you out. That key you used? It didn't just open your adoption file. She glanced meaningfully at the heavy document folder in my hands. It also activated the tracking beacon built into your cellular structure. Welcome to the project, Alexander. Your life as Elias Vance is over, and your new assignment has just begun.